Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, there were two children, Hansel and Gretel. They lived near the edge of a forest with their father and stepmother. Their real mother had passed away some years ago. Their father was a poor woodcutter, barely able to feed his family. One day, the woodcutter said to his wife,
"What will happen to us? We are so poor, we cannot even feed ourselves."
"Listen to me,"
said his wife.
"Tomorrow morning we will bring the children into the forest and leave them there."
"No, I can't do that. They are my dear children,"
exclaimed the woodcutter.
"Shut up, you fool! If we don't leave them, we will all die from hunger."
And she left him no peace until he sadly agreed. The two children heard what their parents had said, and Gretel began to cry. But Hansel thought of a plan. That night, he slipped outside quietly and gathered as many pebbles as his pocket could hold. The next morning, their stepmother gave them some bread, and the woodcutter led them into the forest. Meanwhile, Hansel was slowly dropping the pebbles he had collected the night before, one pebble at a time, leaving a trail for them to find their way back home later. The woodcutter made a fire for them and said,
"Sit here and rest. When I have cut enough wood, I will come back for you."
So they sat and waited until they fell asleep. When they awoke, it was already dark, and their father had not returned. Hansel took his sister's hand and followed the trail of pebbles he had made that morning. They soon found their way home. The stepmother was furious to see them back, but their father was very glad. It hurt him deeply to leave them all alone in the forest. A few days later, the stepmother decided to leave them deeper inside the forest, against the woodcutter's wishes.
"If you don't do it, I will do it myself,"
said the stepmother. After hearing what was planned, Hansel decided to collect more pebbles. That night, he tried to get some pebbles, but the house door was locked. The next morning, their stepmother gave them some bread. Hansel thought that he could use the bread instead of the pebbles, so he crumbled it and dropped breadcrumbs along the way. This time was the same as the first. They waited for the woodcutter until they fell asleep. When they awoke at night, Hansel and Gretel looked for the breadcrumbs, but they couldn't find them. The birds in the forest had eaten everything. They were lost. Hansel and Gretel wandered around in the forest for a long time before they found a funny house. It was made of gingerbread, cakes, candies, chocolate, and lots of icing. They were very hungry from wandering around so much, and decided to eat some of the delicious-looking house. They were so hungry that they didn't notice an old woman watching them. "Nibbling, nibbling like a mouse? Who is nibbling at my house?" asked the old woman gently, as she invited them into her house. The children thought that she was a kind old lady, so they went in. To their horror, they found that the old lady was a wicked witch who wanted to eat up fat children. She made the gingerbread house so that children would follow her in and be trapped. The witch locked Hansel in a cage and made Gretel cook rich, fattening food for him to eat. "When he is nice and fat, I will eat him up," laughed the wicked witch. Every day the witch checked on Hansel. She couldn't see very well, so she had to feel his finger to find out how fat he was. Luckily, Hansel was smart enough to hold out a chicken bone for the witch to feel, so that she would say, "Not fat enough." Week after week, she checked Hansel's bony finger until she could wait no more. She finally told Gretel to fill a pot with water. "Crawl into the oven, see if it is hot enough," instructed the witch, for she wanted to push Gretel into the oven. But Gretel was too clever to be tricked by the witch.
"I don't know how to get into the oven,"
said Gretel innocently. "You stupid fool! I'll show you!" shouted the witch. As the witch started to crawl into the oven, Gretel pushed the old witch all the way into the oven and closed the door. Finally, the old witch was burnt to death. Gretel quickly freed Hansel from the cage, and they filled their pockets with all the witch's treasures they could find. Then they set off to find their way home. After wandering in the forest for a few days, they finally saw their house.
"Father! Father! We are home!"
shouted the children as they ran to hug their father. Their father was overjoyed to see his two children again and hugged them tightly.
"Where is stepmother?"
asked Gretel.
She left me because I am too poor,
answered the father. With that, the children showed their surprised father all that they had taken from the dead witch. They were no longer poor. With their newfound treasures, they were able to buy all that they needed and live happily ever after.